Hey you guys, today I'm going to show you how to make these flower crosses. These are real flowers that are dried and they are in epoxy. I started making this a few months ago and it's become my best sellers items. My shop has about 10% inventory of crosses compared with all the other stuff I have on my shop. Yet 80–90% of my sales are crosses. So I sell a lot of crosses, especially these flower ones. I usually cannot make them fast enough as I sell them. So a really cool project to make, and I'm going to show you how to make it right now. Now here we are in my new shop. This is a separate section of my shop. This is where I pour my epoxy. This is where I do my finishing. So I keep it pretty dust free. We'll be working on these 5 crosses right here. So let's go in closer and see what is the first step we need to do. The molds we'll be working with today is this cross molds. I bought this from Crafted Elements. They have different sizes. Cross molds, let me see if I have some in here. That is not in use. They have this a smaller one over here that's a 6x12. They have this medium size one, and then they also have some really large ones. These big guys here, they're about 20 inches tall. But today we'll just work with one size, is this medium size one. I think it's 15 inches by 8 inches. And first we have to prep our mold. To prep it, we have to wash it with soapy warm water, which I did. It's been dried now for a few hours, and now we need to use a spray release into the mold. If you don't use a spray release, your epoxy will still come out of the mold, but it will damage the mold a little bit quicker. All molds will eventually get damaged after so many uses, and you will need to replace them. But by using spray release, you will protect them and they will last you a lot longer. Especially these ones from Crafted Elements. They're very thick, very solid, and they seem to last a lot longer. Now when it comes to the mold release, I have 3 of them that I use in my shop. I use this one. This is the 200. I have this one, which is the 300. And then I have this guy over here. I buy mine on Amazon. I'll put links on everything I use in the description below. When I make flower crosses, I prefer to use one of these 2 because they are completely clear. If I use pigments in my epoxy, then I will go with this one. This one, if you spray, especially if you heavily spray it, you will notice it is yellow in color. We don't want any yellowing. We want it to have nice, clear epoxy. The difference between these 2 guys is the 200 will give you a more matte look when you pull it out of the mold, where the 300, if your mold is shiny and new, it will come shiny. Doesn't matter for us because we will be sanding the crosses anyway when we get them out of the mold. So either one of these will work just fine. So I'm gonna go outside, spray my mold, and we'll be right back. Our mold is sprayed, and now we are ready to mix our first batch of epoxy. And what we're trying to do now, we're trying to mix just a little bit of epoxy, enough to cover about 1/8 inch on the bottom of this mold. And we'll do that because we need to make sure when we put the flowers in, the flowers are not exposed on the back of the cross. The flowers are real flowers, they are dry flowers, so if they are exposed, they might absorb moisture and they will rot. So we want to make sure they stay dry, they stay sealed. So I'm going to put a 1/8 inch epoxy layer into the mold, and then we will go to the next step. Now, when it comes to what kind of epoxy you want to use, you can pretty much use any epoxy you want, especially for this step. I have a few go-to, but I don't have all kinds of epoxy because, well, I try to try every one of them to see which one is best for which. Some of these epoxies, they were sent to me, so I purchased them with my own money. So the ones I use in my shop, for this first step, I like to use this Maker's epoxy. And I would not use this as a deep pour, but for this first step, it's perfect. Also, I use this Texpert deep pour epoxy. I'll put links to all of this in the description below. And this is what I will be using for the deep pour as well. Now this one, because it is a deep pour, that means when you put a very thin layer, it will take longer to harden. So if you put a very thin layer, you have to wait a full 24 hours before you move to the next step. This one over here, this is a brand of resin that was recommended to me by Derek Smiley Woodworks. He has a YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, go check him out. He is the one that taught me everything I know about epoxy, and he's the one that recommended this brand to me. He purchased it on Amazon. And what's great about this is that it's clear, and also it hardens in about 4 to 6 hours, so we don't have to wait a full 24 hours. So for the first step, I really recommend you use this brand. It is affordable and easy to find on Amazon. Now, if you have money to splurge and you want the best quality resin for this project, this KS resin, they make really good resin, especially formulated for the flower encasing kind of project. It is super expensive though. This one is about $100 a gallon. And if you want to use their top coat, well, be ready because it's $200 a gallon. You have to be insane to spend that kind of money because there are many other brands out there that does just as good of a job, or, you know, close to it. So, but it's there if that's what you want to use. Now, to give you an idea of how many epoxies I used and tested, this is my epoxy stash over here under the bench. All these bottles, it is full of epoxy, all the brands, you might recognize a lot of them. So gallons and gallons and gallons of epoxy, all kinds of brands. So I'm gonna go mix a little bit of this epoxy. I'll mix it into this cup. I'll mix it based on the instructions on the bottle. And when you work with resin, please wear gloves. Use good quality gloves. Do not use this kind of thin kind of gloves that the doctors wear in the office. Those are really not appropriate for resin work. You want to use thick, nice quality gloves because you could develop allergies to resin. If you go on forums on Facebook and Facebook groups and stuff, there's tons of people that got allergies from it. Their hands got swollen and rashes, and also this is the ones I like to use. Very good quality this way. And I buy them in big giant boxes that come with, like, I don't know how many of these packs. I'll put a link in the description for those as well. So I'm gonna go mix up my resin, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how I will get all the bubbles out of the resin. Now, to mix your resin, you could use just a good old popsicle stick, but your arm will get very tired because, you know, it takes a long time. You have to stir it for at least 6 minutes. So I will not be using that. I will be using one of these attachments that you put in the drill, and that will be so much easier for me to mix my epoxy. So I'm gonna go do that, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how I get the bubbles out. All right, you guys, I mixed up the epoxy, and as you can see, it is full of bubbles. So we need to get all these bubbles out because it will be a lot harder to get the bubbles out once we put it in the flowers and stuff, because you can't use a torch or you will burn the flowers. So we need to take this to my vacuum machine and get out the bubbles. Let's go do that. So here is my vacuum pot. This is the pump for it. Let me see if I can get you to see better. So I will be placing my epoxy into the pot. And I'll put this lid on. I will open this valve and I'll close this one. And then I will start the machine and I'll see if I can get you in. The lid is very dirty because I splattered a lot of epoxy on it. But you will see all the bubbles will come out, and it will appear as the epoxy is boiling over, but there's not heating. It's just the bubbles are rising to the top. So let's do that. It's going to be a little bit noisy, but I'll let you watch this. All right, you guys, the bubbles are pretty much dissipated. Let me show you what am I looking at here. And I think it's time to turn off the machine. Now, the epoxy has been in for about 5 minutes or so. So I'm going to turn off the pump. And now I am going to close this valve, and I'm gonna start opening this one very slowly because this one will let all the air out, and if I do it too quickly it will splatter epoxy, and that's how I got epoxy all over the lid before. So slowly release the pressure, and when this dial goes back to 0, then I can open up the lid. All right, we release the pressure. Now we can take off the lid and take out our epoxy, and it is clear like water. There's not a bubble in there. Everything, it's nice and no bubbles. So let's go put this into the mold. So I want to put about 1/8 inch. So that's what I'll do. I'll just pour about 1/8 of an inch. Pour slowly so you don't create bubbles. There we go. And now we let it sit in there for about 24 hours until it becomes tacky but not dry, just thick enough. Now, of course, I prepared this ahead of time, and these other 4 crosses, I already poured the 1/8 inch yesterday, so they're ready for the next step right now. So let me show you what I have in here. If I move my garbage can away. So this is the one that we just poured the epoxy. This 4, they already have the 1/8 inch epoxy from last night when I poured it. This one also has a piece of wood in here. This is some olive wood, because I will try to do a wood and flower cross. So that has been sitting there since last night when I poured the first layer of epoxy, so that way it stays and it's not gonna float. Now let's see if I can get you closer to show you how tacky your epoxy should be before the next step. Now I'm not sure if you'll be able to see here because it's on white, but I'll take a toothpick and I'll poke at it, and you see I can put a dent on it easily. It will not go back, so it's still wet, but it's thick enough where my flowers are not gonna sink in the bottom, yet it's wet enough that the next layer will stick to it and we don't need to sand it to create that bond. Now, when it comes to what kind of flowers to use, as you can see, I have a giant array of dry flowers. All those beans, they are full of dry flowers. So I have big selection. And I could talk about dry flowers all day long. I should probably make a special video, a separate video, so I can tell you which flowers work the best, what to look for, what is not working. But those are my selection of dry flowers, and we'll use some today. But I just don't have time in this video to talk a lot about this subject. The first thing we need to do now, we need to add a little bit of fresh epoxy. There's a little impurity in here. I'm gonna get it out, although it doesn't matter because we'll put dry flowers anyway. Yep, I'll just leave it. So I'm going to put a little bit of this fresh epoxy that I just mixed. Not much, just enough for my first layer to stick to it. Something like this. And the first layer we want to do is the greenery. My favorite greenery to use is ferns, and you can buy them like this on Amazon. This is a 200 pack, so this little pack has like 200 fern leaves. It's very affordable. I think it was like $7. I also have some greenery here that I dried myself. I dry my flowers and my leaves in silica powder. That's really the best way to do it. So right now I'm gonna open this package of fern because this is what I want to use for this cross. All right, now it's time to place them in. And I want to use a lot of greenery. We'll have the flowers on top, so you won't see most of them, but you will see that green kind of through it, the background. So I'll use quite a bit. One thing you need to keep in mind is where you will place your hardware for hanging on the wall. You want to put a lot more dense flowers there and greenery so you don't see the silver hardware through the epoxy. Mine is going to be kind of right here, so I'll make sure I go pretty heavy there on the greenery. And this whole procedure goes pretty quick. I say that is pretty good for the greenery for that one. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing with the other crosses, and then we'll be back and we'll put the flowers in. All right, you guys, my greenery, it's all done, all 5 crosses, and now it's time to put the flowers in. For the first flower, I will be doing a lot of orange flowers, and then I'll try to do different colors, different kinds of flowers, and all the crosses, just so you can see kind of just what kind of flowers works best. So right now I'm just cutting the heads of these lavenders and just putting some in there just for a little bit of this purplish color. Lavender, really easy to find. You can buy it on Amazon or many places. It's very common to get it dry in bouquets. We're done with that one. Next thing, we have to think about our focal point in the middle. I found this orange flower. It's a straw flower. It is very bright, so I think we'll make a nice focal point. I'll put it right there, kind of where my hardware will be. And I have a whole bin. My flowers are arranged by color. Makes it really easy for me. This one has more of a reddish tone. Maybe I'll put this one. I'll make like a triangle here. Let's see if I can find another one of that reddish tone. No, that one is different. Oh, this one is pretty bright, different. All right, so we'll have 3 different flowers there. And then what I like to do is kind of go from the bottom. I'll start in a corner. So I will just go up into a zigzag. If they have a stem, I cut it off because I want these flowers to be as much into the mold as I can. This mold is already a little bit shallower than I want it because the flowers are gonna stick out just a little bit, and I would prefer them. It will make my life a lot easier if they were completely under. So we're done with those. Next, I'll be cutting some of these roses. This is dried roses. So I'll be putting some of those. This one, I left the leaf in there too. More in-depth video about what flowers work best, how to prep the flowers, all that stuff. I can make a separate video just on the flower. There's another petal. I'm gonna put it over there. This will go in here. So I think with orange, I can use some of these yellow millet flowers. So I'll cut the heads off of this, put some of this in. These are a lot more smaller and kind of delicate. So I'm looking for different kind of textures. You can't just put all big flowers or all small flowers. You have to kind of intertwine them to get something pleasing to the eye. I maybe put a little bit of these white flowers that I have here. Let's see what that looks like. Just to fill it in. No, that's too bright. It doesn't go with it. All right, we'll keep those for another cross. I think I'm gonna use some of these red ones. I'm not sure what kind of flowers they are, but I think I'm gonna put some of this in there for a little bit of a variety. All right, you guys, I finished putting the flowers into the crosses, and here is what I ended up with. This is our orange kind of cross, the one that you saw me put the flowers in. Here I have a purple, yellow kind of cross. So that's another one. Here is pinks and yellows. Then the one with the wood has purple and white and yellows. And then the last one, it's all white. The white ones, the all white ones, are very popular with the younger generation, it seems like. So this is my crosses so far, so let's move to the next step. The next step in the process is to pour a thin layer of epoxy over our flowers, and that's because we want them to get locked in place, and by tomorrow the epoxy will cure, but not completely. It will still be tacky, kind of like from yesterday to today. It was still tacky, but not completely hard. So, but that will lock the flowers in place. So tomorrow when I will fill the trays all the way to the top with epoxy, the flowers will not float to the top. If I fill them right now all the way to the top with epoxy, all the flowers will float in the top, and then we'll have a big problem. So let's go pour some thin epoxy over it. I'm going to show you one, and then I'll do the rest off camera. So a very thin layer. Make sure I drizzle a little bit on every single flower, because I really want to make sure, one, it gets stuck to the base, to the other epoxy, and two, it will seal the flower, so then when we fill it up, it will not cause us any bubbles. So just a thin layer. And then I'll do the same with the rest of them, and I will let them sit overnight, and I'll be back here tomorrow to show you the next step. Now, a question that I always get asked is, Skylar, should I seal my flowers first or not? And that's a big question, and generally I would say yes, you should seal your flowers. You should put at least 2 coats of a clear sealer. Now the one I use is this lacquer spray. This is clear. I would not use shellac or something that will amber. So this seems to work really well. They also make a special resin spray, which is just resin in a can, and you can seal with this one as well. This is a lot more expensive than lacquer, and lacquer seems to work just fine. So yes, you should seal your flowers. I don't seal mine, or most of them I don't seal, some of them I do. And just because I've tested these flowers, I've made many crosses, so I know these guys will work just the way they are. Here we are the next day, and our epoxy in the molds has thickened quite a bit, but it's not hard yet, so it's still tacky. And now is the perfect time to mix some more epoxy and fill in the molds. I moved the molds over here on this other table because I will need the main table for top coating some crosses. So when I poured the epoxy yesterday, I had a little bit leftover epoxy, so I also made this tiny cross over here, also a mold from Crafted Elements. So for this part, the epoxy, there's 2 rules when it comes to the epoxy you'll need for this part. 1, it has to be non-yellowing, and 2, it has to not produce an exothermic reaction. That means it should not heat up as it cures. Good epoxies for this would be this designer epoxy, liquid glass epoxy, the deep pour, the magic resin, that's another good one. Texpert, this is what I use for my first layer of epoxy, so I'm gonna stick with this one for my next layer. What you want to stay away from is epoxies that are yellowing. You can see this one from iCrystal. It has quite a straw color, so you do not want this, as your epoxy is not going to be clear. Also, you do not want an epoxy like this one, because this one, when poured thicker, it will produce a lot of heat, and that will scorch your flowers. You want a deeper pour epoxy, one, to not produce heat, so it doesn't scorch your flowers. Also, usually the deep pour epoxies are thinner, so it's easier to get the bubbles out into the vacuum pot, like we did yesterday. And you really want to get all those bubbles out, because normally when you just do wooden epoxy, you can use a torch or a heat gun. We cannot use any of those in this project because we will torch the flowers. The flowers are dry, they will burn quite easily. So I'm gonna go mix a big batch of the epoxy, and then we'll come back and we'll fill these trays out to the rim. I mixed up my big batch of epoxy. As you can see, I got all the bubbles out. It's crystal clear, just like water. And now what I will do is pour them into the molds and fill it all the way to the top. So let's go do that. If you pour too quickly, you will cause bubbles. And remember, there is no way to get the bubbles out. So very, very slowly fill in your molds. I filled up the molds with epoxy, and now if you look from this side, let's see if you can focus there, you can see we have some flowers that are sticking out of the mold. We have it on that mold, we have it on this mold. Just a tiny little bit on this one, not too much. This one did not stick out because the flowers are quite flat. This one we have a couple of little pieces, but not bad. These two, mostly, we have some flowers sticking out. And this is where I wish these molds were just a quarter inch, a little bit deeper, so taller. Because even though I use fairly small flowers, we have some that sticks out. And the problem with that is, when I will demold it and take it and sand it, we will remove some of those flowers. And then the flowers, when you sand it, it pulls out some petals, and then you get some little holes. And it's just, you know, it's workable, but you have to be aware of that. We will have this issue. I looked all over to find some bigger molds, and there are bigger molds there, but not at this quality. So this is a really good quality, and they work really well. So I'm gonna stick with these ones, but if I ever find some that are a little bit deeper, I will let you know. Crafted Elements do have deeper molds, like this one over here. I made this one with fake flowers, so quite deep. However, I feel like they are a little bit chunky. I'm not in love with this shape. This is the only one I made like this, and I don't think I'll be making them anymore. So they do have some deeper ones. If you want to work with some deeper ones, it's just very, very chunky. Now, when I did pour the epoxy, let's see if I can show you. I did get some tiny, tiny little bubbles. Hold on, I have to flip you around. Now, I don't know if you can see here, but when I poured the epoxy, I did end up with some tiny bubbles, like this one over here. And most of these bubbles will dissipate on its own. But if you do want to take care of those, a toothpick, it's your best bet. Let's see if you can focus. So where is my toothpick? And I will just poke it, pop that bubble, and I'll go around all the crosses and pop as many bubbles as I can. You can kind of just drag them out and pop them. So this is what I'll be doing for the next 30 minutes. I'll look out for these tiny bubbles and try to pop them, because like I said, we cannot use a heat gun. So toothpick it is. I popped all the bubbles, and now it's important we let this sit for 3 days or so until we pull them out of the mold. And then once you get them out of the mold, really important, put them on a flat surface and let it sit for another 4 to 5 days. You do not want to start sanding as soon as you take them out of the mold, because the epoxy, even though it's hard, is not really cured, and it's going to be really hard to sand. It's going to clog your sandpaper. If you use a drum sander, it's gonna be a big disaster. You wanted to let it really cure, then it's gonna be a lot easier to sand and do the next steps. Now don't worry, I'm not gonna make you wait 5 days to see the next step. Luckily, I have 2 crosses here that are ready for the next step. This one just got out of the mold. It's one of the pink flowers one. And this one, I had it out of the mold and I sanded, and then you see those wet spots where they're not wet, that's where I put some epoxy. This is because this had some of those flowers that were sticking out of the mold. So when I sanded the cross, it sanded some of those flowers off, and I pulled out some petals. So I had some little gaps in there that I needed to fill. So what I did is I mixed a little bit of tabletop epoxy, and I just poured a thin layer in there to cover the holes and seal it all back up. So now I will be sanding this again, and then we will do the top coat. This one I already routed a profile on it, but this one, as I said, is straight out from the mold. This is not a complete piece. Even though it looks all shiny and nice, it has some very sharp edges here. And this will happen when you work with epoxy and molds. That's because all epoxies shrink as they cure. So as it shrinks, it stays, crawls on the walls here. And you have some really sharp edges. Also, the corners are very sharp. So what we need now to do is we need to sand it. We need to sand the top, we need to sand the bottom, we need to sand the sides. We need to take it to the router table and put a round over profile, and also soften all the corners. So I'm gonna go do that right now. Let's go into the shop. Now the first thing I'll be doing is I will sand this through the drum sander, just the top part of the cross, and I wanna get it completely flat and get rid of these sharp edges. So I'm going to do that with my drum sander. Like I said, you can hand sand this. It's not hard and it won't take long at all. But I have a drum sander and it makes it so much faster, so that's what I'm gonna do. I'm not going to sand the whole thing. I'm not gonna do the back and the sides, just the top. The cross is sanded where the top part it is, and now I'm going to take it to the router table and I will put a round over all around it, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch round over, so that's what we're going to do next. It turns out I forgot to press record as I was doing the round over, but anyhow, here is my round over. And now what I will do with a hand sander, 150 sandpaper grit, I will sand the back and I will sand the edges. I will soften the corners, and then we're gonna go do the tabletop epoxy to finish it and make it all shiny. I'm almost done sanding the crosses. I sanded the back, the sides, so everything is done, but right here you can see on the joints there's still shiny parts, and if we don't sand that, then we don't get the proper bond between the top coat and this epoxy. I found the easiest way to sand that side. You cannot use a sponge like this because this is straight corners and this is not a straight corner, so the sponge will not get in there. But if you use one of these sponges that has a 45-degree, then I can take my sandpaper, put it on that edge, and that would allow me to get right there into the corner and give it a good sanding. I'm pretty much done with sanding. Now I will take some isopropyl alcohol and clean all the dust away from my crosses. And then I need to put some resin tape on the back of my cross so that when I do the top coat and I get the drips underneath, it makes it a lot easier to clean up. I've tried blue tape, I tried all kinds of other things, and I think resin tape works the best so far. This is what resin tape looks like, and comes in all kinds of different widths, kind of like the same way you'll buy your blue painter's tape. So this one, I am going to tape it all the way to the edge. And there you go. This one, it's all protected on the back, so I'm gonna do the same thing with the other one now. We're almost done, you guys. Now we have to do the top coat. For that, I'll be using a super clear tabletop epoxy. This is what I seem to gravitate towards using. There are many different brands of tabletop epoxy. You can use whatever you want. They will all work. You can even use regular epoxy, but I don't recommend it because it will take a lot longer to cure. So this one will be hard by tomorrow, where regular epoxy, if you put it thin to just top coat, it would take 2 to 5 days to cure. So I'm going to mix it in this little cup. For one cross, I need about 1.5 ounces. I'll be mixing 2 ounces. And I'm gonna mix just 2 ounces, even though I'm doing 2 crosses, because if I mix all 4 ounces at once, by the time I finished doing one, the epoxy will not be good anymore. It only has working time about 10 minutes. So that means we cannot put it into the vacuum chamber. We have to work with it and be done in 10 minutes. And I cannot use my mixer with a drill to mix it. So I'll be using a popsicle stir, mix it by hand, and then I will show you how I do the tabletop epoxy. I mixed in the epoxy and accidentally I poured way too much, but I'm not gonna use it all. As you can see, full of bubbles. It's almost white, milky. That's okay because we will use a torch and remove all the bubbles. So just finished mixing it. Make sure you scrape the walls of your container. You do not want any epoxy that is not properly mixed because they will not cure right. I'm going to bring you in closer. I hope you can see from there. Let me turn you around the other way. So here is how I will do this. First, I will put, let me make sure I'm recording. I can't see the screen. All right. So first I will put just a little bit of epoxy like this in the middle of my cross. Then I'll take my hands with the gloves. Make sure you use good quality gloves. And I'm gonna rub this mostly on the edges and yeah, on the edges. Wanna make sure I don't miss any spots. I'm not worried about the top now. I just want to make sure I really get all the edges. All right, I think I got all the edges. You can usually feel it with your hands. Now I will put some more. And this time, I make sure I spread it all around on the top. I do always want to use more epoxy, better than less. If you use less, sometimes you might get uneven or you get little divots. I'm going to take my gloves off, which is always the hardest part because they're so slippery and I don't want to touch my skin with epoxy hands. But sometimes I will take a paper towel and there you go. Now I will take my torch and I will start with the edges. Now, I didn't get all the bubbles at once. I don't want to overwork it because you can burn the resin. So I will just let it sit for a few minutes just to cool a little bit and then I'll torch it again. Now, here is how I check if I have any kind of dust or bubbles. You see the lights in my ceiling? I can pretty much follow that. And I look at it and right there, you see I have a piece of dust. I'm going to show you how I remove that piece of dust. So to remove that piece of dust, I'm trying to do it while I'm holding my phone. So let me look at it. Where is it? Right there. So what I will do, I will use a toothpick And I will just scoop it out. And I think I got it. Now I'm about around the 10-minute mark on working with this tabletop epoxy, so I better stop. I picked up as much as the tiny little dusts and popped all the bubbles and all of that. If I keep working on it now, I'll probably do more bad than good. So it's better to leave it alone. Then tomorrow I will reassess it, and if it has any kind of little imperfections, then I'll do a light sanding and put one more top coat. So let me show you what it looks like right now. So this is what it's looking like now. I don't see any dust, any bubbles. So what I will do now is I will take a plastic bin and I will cover it so I make sure that way no dust will land on it overnight. So one more check quickly. Make sure nothing big landed on it since I was talking to you guys. And it's looking good. I am going to take this large bin and place it over it and leave it alone. Now I will be top coating the other cross as well, and then I will see you tomorrow. Good morning, beautiful people. Let's see how our crosses are looking. I have not even taken a peek at them yet. And oh, it's looking beautiful. I don't see, this one might have a little bit of imperfection. I might have to do that again. And this one looks just about perfect. So here is, let me get you in better light. All right, this is our cross. You see how nice it looks in the sun. I'm trying to see the sun here. There you go. And let's peel off this tape on the back. See what the back looks like. Now this one also looks beautiful, but I do have a couple of little bumps on this side. So I'll have to sand it and refinish it. So we'll put that aside for now. Let me bring you in closer. I will use an awl. And let's start peeling this tape off. You see all the drips that are on the edges. So let's see what it looks like when we take the tape off. And this looks like after I take the tape off. So we still need to sand it, but now it's so much less to sand. We don't have those drips anymore. So all I need is just to use some 220 on the back, and that will take care of those little edges. So we'll do that next. All right, you guys, I have about 15 minutes until I have to go get dressed for dinner. So let's see if we can finish this cross. As you can see, the cross looks really nice, but we pulled out that tape and we do have some rough edges there. So now it's time to sand the back of the cross. What I did in here, let me point you down so you can see my table. I put a towel on the table because I don't want to scratch this, and I'll have this upside down like this. And then I put the paper towel. And now I will quickly give it some sanding with 180 and then with 220. So let me do that, and then we'll move to the next step. Now here is the hardware I'll be attaching on the back, and I cannot screw it in because you will see the screws from the front. So I'm gonna use this 5-minute epoxy. In order to make sure the epoxy really sticks well, I am going to take some coarse sandpaper, and let me show you here what I do. I put it on the edge of my table and just really scratch the surface of my hardware over there. And that will ensure that my epoxy will really stick to it. Also, with my 180 sandpaper, I will do a little bit of scratching of the epoxy right where I think I'm gonna put the hardware. Now that we have that done, we have to mix the epoxy. So I'm going to use equal parts of part A and part B. So there's one, and there's the other. So I put two blobs in there next to each other, and then I'll take a popsicle stick and mix it all together. You want to really mix it well. We don't want this cross to come off the wall and come crashing down. So, all right, my epoxy, it's mixed. So now I will take my hardware and just kind of dip it into that epoxy. Get about this much on it. So I'm gonna do both sides. You can take the popsicle stick too if you need, and put some epoxy on it. So I got some epoxy on it, and now I'll just go to my cross. I usually like to face it this way so I can see if I'm straight or not. And I will just put the epoxy there. Put the hardware, can you see that? And then make sure it's straight. And then I'll take my tape dispenser and rest it on it to make sure it has some pressure in there and it sticks. And I'll let it sit for 5 minutes until the epoxy cures. Now I will leave my popsicle stick right here on the epoxy. And when this popsicle stick is completely stuck to this and it cannot come off unless I break it, then I know that one, it's all cured. The epoxy, it's cured. I tried to peel off this popsicle stick. As you can see, it broke there. So we know the epoxy is cured, and now it's time to put a finish on the back of the cross. For the finish, I'm just gonna put some of my Sawdust and Splinter board butter. So this is just normal board butter, mineral oil, and beeswax. So let's see what that's gonna make it look like. And I'm just going to wipe it with a rag. Very, very simple procedure. All right, so let me show you what it looks like. So you see this just makes it so you can see all the leaves now. So that's the back, that's the front. Very, very nice. So now I need to give the cross a little wipe. So I'll just take a paper towel and I'll spray some isopropyl alcohol on it. And then I'll give my cross a wipe to make it nice and clean. Remove all that dust from sanding it. And just like that, we are done.